When it comes to politics and poultry in Iowa, the most important question is not why did the chicken cross the road? It's what do you do when your neighbor's chicken crosses into your yard? Because the wrong response could cost Iowa Democrat Bruce Braley a seat in the U.S. Senate. Picture it. There he was with his wife, Carolyn, enjoying a little time away at their vacation home in Brooklyn, Iowa, taking in the view of picturesque Holiday Lake, when all of a sudden their peace and quiet is broken by the pitter-patter of little chicken feet. 4 hens belonging to a neighbor had, unbeknownst to her, flown the coop and ended up going for a stroll on Braley's property. Later, when the neighbor stopped by to offer up a gift of a dozen of her chicken's eggs, she says the Braleys informed her that not only did they not want her eggs, but they had filed a formal complaint against her for the wandering chickens. The neighbor built a fence to hold her hens, and the chickens went home to roost. But for Braley, who was running against Republican Joni Ernst to replace Tom Harkin, that's when the feathers started flying, because ratting out one's neighbor is simply not the Iowa way. And by crying foul, Braley had given his opponents the perfect political ammunition for an attack.
After a chicken crossed into his Iowa vacation property, Braley threatened to sue his neighborhood. A true Iowan would have just talked to his neighbors, but not trial lawyer Bruce Braley.
That is genius.
It's genius.
It's genius.
And it shows, again, you have to know the state that you're running in. Whether you're running for Congress, you got to know the district. For Senate, you got to know the state. Those are the kinds of cultural cues that people take and say, oh, he's not one of us.
Yeah, and it's razor thin. We're talking about 49, 48,
right.
like literally a chicken. And the chicken controversy could, in fact, impact this race.
Oh, absolutely. And this, if it weren't for his other problems this year, this might not be as big of a deal. But this is someone who has said that trial lawyers are real great, has said that farmers, perhaps aren't the best people to be running Senate committees. And that doesn't help. And so it's when something like this reinforces what people might already suspect about you, that's not good. And slightly to bring it back to Hillary Clinton, the Clintons are very engaged right now in what's happening at the Senate level, and that's one of the reasons she is in Iowa. Clearly, she's running for president, but she is paying real close attention to this, and I am most listening today to what she says about Bruce Braley.
Right, and Matt, take that, the chicken controversy. Let's compare. I want to look for just a moment in case people have forgotten Joni Ernst, hog commercial.
I'm Joni Ernst. I grew up castrating hogs on an Iowa farm. So when I get to Washington, I'll know how to cut pork.
I mean,
Okay.
memorable.
I love that commercial at the core of my soul for exactly that reason, that it goes to this point.
I'd like a little bacon now. I have to tell you, I mentioned the 1,000 voters a week that we're talking to right now. Joni Ernst hasn't really broken through with those folks. They have a good sense of who Bruce Braley is, and they also have a really good sense of the economic issues that divide the two candidates. She's been all over the map in terms of some of the core economic issues of Iowa, and that's going to really help her that's going to create a challenge for her in terms of defining who she is. At the end of the day, these commercials are really entertaining. They are really entertaining. But it matters what happens in people's pocketbooks there.
And the problem ends up being, so you talk to people on the ground in Iowa, and the whole Braley thing, well, they say, actually, Braley's wife went over and talked to the neighbor first before this thing happened, and the neighbor said, I came over and offered these eggs, and this all came out of nowhere, and what the real truth, nobody knows. It ends up this kind of stereotype. So you end up with this stereotype and that stereotype, and the folks in Iowa say, there is so much outside money right now being spent on both of these campaigns with caricatures of both of the candidates. And the reality of both of them is still somewhat unknown to the people out there, because all they're just being inundated by slam, slam, slam.
And I wonder if this goes back to the point you were making earlier about Iowans taking their political responsibility seriously and maybe even being irritated a bit by a stereotype that suggests that hog castration or a chicken egg controversy would be sufficient to overcome their economic concerns.
They don't like outsiders telling them what to do, for sure. They want to be able to meet them and talk to them. And these candidates are both out there constantly campaigning.
Although, I just sat in on a focus group of working moms this week from Des Moines, Iowa. It was mixed economics, swing voters, Romney voters, Obama voters. What they remembered about Joni Ernst was that commercial. They didn't remember that much about Bruce Braley, actually. And to what Harry was saying, they felt so inundated by the negative ads. They hated the negative ads, but the thing is, they worked
paid
because
attention.
they remembered
Yeah.
exactly the
Was this
key
the Walmart
points.
moms thing?
Yeah, the Walmart moms. Yeah. And what was most interesting, though, also,
I want you to pause real quick
Yep.
because even though y'all know what the Walmart Moms thing is, just help the viewers know what that is.
So basically, it's a project that's being done with moms who shop at Walmart from all over the country, and they've been doing this project for a little over a year. And this one specifically was focusing on the races in Iowa, and actually there was a group in Arkansas.
Got it.
But they've done economic issues, they've done education issues. I mean, they've done a range of issues. So this group was specifically sort of talking about what's going on in Des Moines. And what was interesting was they wanted to know more about what the candidates stood for. They kept saying that. The two things that they kept talking about, though, school violence and ISIS. So this idea of, which is part of what I think you're seeing ads kind of bringing in sort of the tension and fear that people have about what's going on outside.
So it's fascinating you say that because, living in North Carolina right now, where there's another big, hotly contested Senate race going on, the very first question in the Senate debate that was on our local PBS channel was an ISIS question. Given that that is on the top of people's agenda, and that Hillary Clinton's most recent job was Secretary of State, will that in any way end up emerging as part of her Iowa story? I mean, we're talking steak fries, but are people going to be worried about?
I think it depends. If she should run, I think it depends on where we are at that point in the cycle, because it's just interesting that people, they definitely certainly still have some economic concerns, and again, they wanted to hear more from the candidates about that and education and their child's future. But the idea that this outside stuff was breaking through was really fascinating, and it could be a factor in the 2016 elections, depending upon where we end up.
That's totally true. And just think of how quickly things shift, right? Like the entire primary campaign for the Democrats in 2008 was run on the Iraq War, and like that she voted for it, and Obama was against it from the beginning. And then the election ended up being about the economy after the big crash in September.
Right.
And so things do really shift. But
And in 2012, President Obama was able to run as, I am the president who made sure that Osama bin Laden is dead. But now anyone who worked for him may be, and you didn't stop ISIS, right? It's hard to say where the narrative will go.
True, but the Democratic sources that I talk to say that economic issues again and again and again and again are what people care about, what they're feeling at home, and while they're worried about this, they are still voting on their pocketbooks.
I'm actually completely in agreement with Christina, in as much as we're looking at voters, we're looking at the data coming in from North Carolina, from Kentucky, from Iowa, from all of these states. And despite the recent events, we haven't really seen a shift in what voters are prioritizing in terms of the issues they're voting on. Now, there are certain segments, the Walmart moms, for example, where security is a greater concern, and I think this is certainly going to speak to those voters. But when you're thinking about what's going to happen in the midterms, and that's the question that's before the voters right now, we're likely to see the economic issues continue to dominate that decision making.
Kay Hagan going to win that Senate race in North Carolina?
I think so.
You can come back. Okay. Thank you to my panel, Harry Smith and Christina Bellantoni and Matt Morrison, who can come back because he just predicted that win. Karen is going to be back with us in the next hour. Still to come this morning, the NFL looking more and more beleaguered every day, and why the most important thing Apple announced this week was far from a watch or a bigger screen for your phone.